Tel Aviv's use of internationally banned weapons, including depleted uranium and white phosphorus during the war on Gaza at the turn of 2009, has resulted in a sharp increase in numbers of cancer patients in Gaza. Experts say that 4 years following the war, uranium, zinc, mercury and other cancerous materials are now found in the Gaza soil. Norwegian doctors volunteering in Gaza hospitals during that onslaught said some victims had traces of depleted uranium in their bodies.
But in particular during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982 and in the siege of Beirut, in which the population was subjected to saturation bombing, and that entailed chemical weapons and white phosphorus. Such was the scale of the impact of this weaponry that the hospitals could no longer contain the victims, and the Al-Hut Theological Center in Beirut had to be seconded for the victims. We were witnesses to this. We were trying to involve the International Red Cross in the documentation of the same, and this is a long-standing pattern. In 2001, there was a documentation of nerve gas attacks throughout Gaza, particularly in Khan Yunis in the Harbi refugee camp on the 12th of February 2001. The first attack led to 40 people being admitted to Al-Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis in a state of nervous breakdown, and the doctors were able to document the Israeli use of nerve gas causing convulsions. This is a consistent pattern. It's not a new thing. Every time there is war, the Israelis deploy this weaponry because their target is the population itself. John Cook documented gas attacks in March 2001. Doctors in Hussein Hospital reported rapid increase in untreatable patients suffering from gas and chemical attacks. I mean, the United States government has deployed these weapons. We documented this with respect to the war in Indochina. I was Secretary General of the International Tribunal on United States War Crimes in Indochina. Not merely chemical weapons, but weapons, the gases that explode the pupil of the eye were a standard weapon used by the United States forces against the Vietnamese population. And this weaponry has always been deployed by the United States with respect to the Israeli armed attacks on the Palestinian people. It is a pattern that goes on decade after decade in each imperial war. These are wars of annihilation directed against entire populations. They are war crimes. They are crimes against humanity. And in each conflict, we have renewed documentation of this type of weaponry used against civilian populations. The Goldstone report was explicit in documenting the use of these types of munitions, what are called DIME, or dense inert metal explosives, which were amply documented throughout Gaza. And indeed, in the Goldstone report, it references these attacks in all parts of Gaza subject to siege. In the documentation that was provided by Jean Shaul on 24th of October 2006, Israel was using chemical weapons and phosphorus bombs throughout Lebanon and also in Gaza. Reference to changes in the United Nations procedures. These are the weapons of mass destruction that exploits people whose resources it steals against people whose sovereignty it wants to annihilate. And this can only be resolved by a revolutionary overthrow of the regimes that are responsible for these crimes against humanity. No amount of resolutions and declarations by United Nations whose member governments consist of the same forces that are engaged in imperial conquest will result in any change in this behavior.
More than even the relations between Germany and Saudi Arabia, does this not say a lot about the Persian Gulf Arab countries' relations with Israel?
Israel has been doing nothing but talking for decades about being pushed into the sea by nations that have obviously been their allies all along. The Arab nations have long been aligned with Israel, and as your previous speaker had noted, with their games on the great chessboard. What I find particularly humorous, with the exception that these weapons are only meant to be used to suppress the potential difficulties within Saudi Arabia that we expect, and of course the existing struggle within Bahrain, is that the Germans have finally found a way to profiteer off their phony war guilt. This is a very disingenuous move on Germany's part. It's clearly profiteering. Merkel's political party is going to get a big kickback from Saudi Arabia. That's what closed this deal. It's a political payoff in Germany. And as far as the efficacy of these weapons, defending anyone from Iran. What are they going to do? Start throwing vehicles at Iran? The giant catapult? The entire story is ludicrous, totally ludicrous.
So, Mr. Duff, what does this also say about what these Persian Gulf Arab states feel towards the Palestinian cause? Certainly, when they're aligning themselves with Palestine's enemy, in a sense, doesn't that raise a number of questions about that as well?
There have been individual Saudi groups that have done gone to considerable effort to aid the Palestinians. However, the governments of the Gulf, frankly, have done as much to suppress the Palestinian people almost as the Israelis have. They have shown little or no concern, and frankly, in the Emirates, I look at how they had treated their Palestinian, they call them guest workers. They have brutally repressed anyone that works in those countries, anyone that isn't a resident, and many Palestinians have found their periods of labor in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates to be the equivalent of being in a concentration camp, something, of course, we've seen the Israelis doing all along. There really is no appreciable difference between the behavior of the Israelis and many of the Gulf states.